You ever notice how the moment you need to prove your point, everything starts to fall apart? The conversation gets louder, your heartbeat gets faster, and suddenly it's not even about the issue anymore. It's about being right. And that's the moment every argument gets worse. Because the truth is, arguments don't spiral because of words. They spiral because of attachment. The moment your peace depends on someone agreeing with you, you've already given your power away. You've made their opinion your master and your peace its servant. And here's the hard truth: you can't hold peace and control at the same time. One has to go. You see, when you detach, not in arrogance, not in avoidance, but in awareness, you create a holy stillness inside you. That's where wisdom lives. That's where you stop reacting and start responding. It's where you see the person, not just the problem. Every argument gets worse when your emotions become your evidence, when you fight to be seen instead of to understand, when you use your words to win instead of connect. But the person who can stand calm in the storm, they don't just change the conversation, they transform it. You want to know what real strength looks like. It's not the person who always has the last word. It's the one who doesn't need it. Because they know that silence, when guided by peace, speaks louder than any rebuttal ever could. And listen, when you detach, you don't stop caring. You stop carrying what isn't yours. You stop lifting the weight of someone else's emotions, someone else's misunderstanding. You let truth do its own heavy lifting. The reason detachment feels so powerful is because it's alignment, your spirit stepping out of the chaos and standing in purpose. When you don't take the bait of every argument, you're saying, I know who I am. I don't need to prove it. Every argument gets worse when you forget that peace isn't found in being understood. It's found in understanding yourself. And when you walk in that kind of clarity, you don't fight for peace anymore. You become it. The more emotionally attached you are to being right, the further you drift from peace. That's the quiet truth most people never face, because being right feels good. It feels safe. It feeds the ego and validates the image we've built of ourselves. But the moment you tie your peace to the need to be right, you enter a battle that can't be won. Even if you win the argument, you lose the stillness within you. Think about it. When you're arguing, you're not defending truth. You're defending identity. And that's why it hurts so much when someone disagrees with you. You're not just hearing, you might be wrong. You're hearing, you might not be enough. So you double down, you push harder, you raise your voice. But all that energy isn't power, it's fear disguised as conviction. It's the soul clinging to control because it's forgotten that truth doesn't need defending. Truth stands on its own. When you detach from being right, you make room for wisdom. You open the door for empathy, curiosity, and understanding. You realize that peace isn't found in proving anything. It's found in being grounded in something greater than opinion, in character, in calm, in purpose. The person who no longer needs to win stops bleeding energy into every disagreement. They move with quiet confidence, knowing that understanding others doesn't mean abandoning themselves. The ego thrives on opposition. It loves the tension of conflict because it creates the illusion of importance. But your spirit, your higher self, knows that peace and ego can't share the same room. The more you try to be right, the less you hear, the less you hear, the less you grow. You start reacting instead of reflecting, defending instead of discerning. That's how peace leaves, not with noise, but with neglect. Detachment isn't indifference. It's mastery. It's knowing that truth doesn't need your anxiety to prove itself. It's realizing that peace is more powerful than validation. When you can stand in disagreement and remain calm, you've already won something far greater than an argument. You've won your inner freedom, because being right might feel satisfying for a moment, but being at peace lasts forever. Every argument grows louder when your ego takes the mic. It's not the words that raise the volume. It's the need to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. The ego steps in like a performer on stage, needing applause, needing acknowledgement, needing to feel like it matters. But here's the truth: the moment ego speaks, peace leaves. Because ego doesn't want connection. It wants control. It doesn't want resolution. It wants recognition. You can feel it when it happens. Your body tightens, your tone sharpens, and suddenly the conversation isn't about understanding anymore. It's about winning. You stop listening and start waiting for your turn to talk. You start crafting comebacks instead of seeking clarity. That's the ego at work, turning what could have been healing into hostility. It's not that you don't care. It's that you care too much about the wrong thing, how you look instead of who you are. The ego hates silence because silence threatens its illusion of power. It thrives on reaction, Every sigh, every raised eyebrow, every cutting remark is food for its survival. But wisdom doesn't yell. Truth doesn't shout. Love doesn't compete. The louder your ego gets, the quieter your spirit becomes. And that's when the real loss happens, not in the argument, but in yourself. When you let your ego take the mic, you trade understanding for performance. You start defending your image instead of expressing your heart. And the tragedy is, both people in the conversation end up fighting ghosts, not reality, but projections of pride and pain. No one feels heard because everyone's too busy talking over their own insecurity. But when you notice it, when you feel that pull to raise your voice, to prove your point, to dominate the moment, that's your invitation to pause, to breathe, to let your spirit reclaim the mic. Because humility isn't weakness, it's strength under control. It's knowing you don't have to be loud to be clear, and you don't have to be right to have peace. The argument stops growing the moment your ego steps aside. When your heart speaks, instead, your words carry light instead of heat. And that's when conversations stop breaking things and start building something worth keeping. The strongest voice in the room isn't the one that shouts, it's the one that stays still. Real strength doesn't need to make noise to be noticed. It doesn't demand attention. It commands it through presence. Stillness is not the absence of power, it's power under perfect control. It's the quiet authority that comes from knowing who you are, what you believe, and what's worth your peace. When chaos rises, most people match its energy. Voices climb, tempers flare, and suddenly the room becomes a battlefield of emotion instead of a space for understanding. But the one who remains calm becomes the anchor, the unmoving center that everyone else unconsciously looks toward. There's something magnetic about stillness. It disarms defensiveness and interrupts the cycle of reaction. It doesn't argue for dominance, it reveals confidence. When you stay still, you're not being passive. You're being purposeful. You're choosing to operate from wisdom instead of impulse. It takes more strength to remain calm under pressure than it does to explode in anger. Anyone can yell, anyone can react, but it takes mastery to hold peace in a storm. That stillness doesn't mean you don't feel deeply. It means you've learned how to guide what you feel instead of being guided by it. Stillness speaks a language that noise can't. It says, I'm grounded. I'm not threatened. I don't need to prove my value. It creates a sense of safety in the conversation, even when things get hard. Because when you're still, you're not trying to overpower someone. You're giving truth room to breathe. And that's what changes hearts far more than volume ever could. The strongest voice isn't the one that interrupts. It's the one that listens with purpose and speaks with intention. When you talk from peace, your words carry weight. They cut through confusion because they come from clarity, not chaos. Stillness is strength disguised as softness. A quiet confidence that says, I can stay calm, even here. That's the kind of presence that transforms not just arguments, but atmospheres. Because when you can hold your peace while others lose theirs, you become the grounding force that turns noise into understanding and conflict into connection. Detachment isn't coldness, it's clarity. It's not a wall you build to keep people out. It's the space you create so truth can breathe. Most people mistake detachment for indifference, but real detachment is deeply spiritual. It's the act of stepping back, not because you don't care, but because you care enough not to lose yourself in the chaos. It's knowing that love and logic can coexist, that compassion doesn't require confusion. When you're emotionally entangled in every outcome, you can't see clearly. You start reacting from fear, not wisdom. You start confusing urgency with importance, noise with truth. Detachment clears the fog. It lets you observe without absorbing, understand without over-identifying. It's the ability to sit in the middle of someone else's storm and not let the rain define you. Clarity comes when you stop needing to control how things unfold. When you detach, you see things for what they are, not what your emotions tell you they should be. That's where strength begins, because control is rooted in fear, but clarity is rooted in faith. Faith that truth doesn't need to be forced. Faith that peace can exist even when people disagree. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop drowning in what you feel. It's self-leadership, choosing to rise above emotional turbulence so you can act with integrity instead of impulse. You stop needing to fix everything, prove everything, or win everything. You start realizing that not every battle deserves your energy, and not every voice deserves a reaction. The detached heart doesn't turn to stone. It turns to stillness. It's steady, centered, discerning. It doesn't absorb the heat of the moment because it's anchored in truth, not tension. And when you move from that place, your presence itself becomes healing. You become the calm in the conflict, the pause between chaos and peace. That's the beauty of clarity. It allows love to flow without losing boundaries. You can care deeply and still stay balanced. You can listen without being swayed. You can respond without reacting, because when you detach from the need to control, you finally discover the power of simply being fully present, fully aware, and completely at peace. You don't need to win when you've already mastered your emotions. Victory means something different when your peace is no longer on the table. The person who has control over their emotions doesn't chase validation, doesn't fight to be right, and doesn't let anger make their decisions. Mastery isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about understanding them, owning them, and choosing how they move through you. It's the quiet discipline of knowing that just because you feel something strongly doesn't mean you have to act on it. When emotions run high, most people confuse reaction with power. They think the louder they speak, the stronger they are. But that's an illusion. True power is being able to sit in the heat of the moment and not let it burn your integrity. It's being able to stay grounded while others lose balance. When you've mastered your emotions, you stop fighting to win arguments because you realize you can't win peace by losing yourself. Every emotional reaction is an invitation, either to prove your maturity or to repeat your history. You get to decide. When you master your emotions, you become aware of that moment, the gap between stimulus and response. That space is sacred. That's where self-control lives, where wisdom whispers, where strength shows up. It's not weakness to pause before you speak, it's intelligence. It's how peace keeps its power. Winning an argument might feed your pride for a minute, but mastering your emotions feeds your spirit for a lifetime. Because once your peace is stable, people can't use your emotions to control you. They can throw words, shade, silence, but you stay still. You stop being predictable. You stop being pulled. You start leading the energy instead of reacting to it. Emotional mastery is freedom. It's the ability to feel deeply without being driven blindly. It's when your peace becomes non-negotiable. You don't need to win because you already have what everyone's fighting for: inner stability. The person who rules their emotions rules their world. Because when peace governs your reactions, your presence itself becomes power. And in that space, you realize no argument is worth trading your balance for, because the greatest victory is remaining calm when everything around you demands that you don't. When you defend your worth in every argument, you've already forgotten it. The moment you feel the need to prove your value, you've allowed someone else's perception to become your mirror. Worth doesn't need defending. It's inherent. It's something you carry, not something you earn through debate or validation. Every time you argue to be understood, to be seen, to be respected, you hand your peace to the other person and ask them to give it back in the form of approval. But peace doesn't come from being recognized. It comes from remembering who you are. Defensiveness is often disguised insecurity. It's the voice inside saying, if they don't see my value, maybe it isn't real. But that's the lie. Your worth was never up for negotiation. The moment you attach it to someone's opinion, you've built your identity on unstable ground. And that's why every disagreement feels personal. Every criticism feels like a wound. Every silence feels like rejection. But the truth is, no one can touch what's already secure. You only get offended when you forget that your identity isn't defined by agreement. When you know your worth, you stop performing. You stop arguing for validation. You start moving from peace instead of pain. People can misunderstand you, talk about you, dismiss you, and you still stay steady. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you know that your value doesn't shrink in someone else's small perception. That's the quiet power of self-assurance. It's the ability to let people be wrong about you and still stay kind. Arguments built on insecurity never lead to peace, only exhaustion. You keep explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. But when you're rooted in worth, you no longer chase closure or correction. You carry it. You respond from truth, not from fear. You realize that silence can speak your confidence louder than any defense ever could. Knowing your worth means you stop asking others to confirm what you already know. You stop proving and start being. You stop reacting and start rising. Because the moment you remember your value, you realize you never needed to defend it. You only needed to live it. And that kind of quiet certainty ends more arguments than any perfect explanation ever will. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It often means self-control has taken command. People often mistake quiet for weakness, but silence can be one of the most powerful responses a person can give. It's not the absence of strength, it's the presence of discipline. When emotions rise and tension fills the air, silence becomes the doorway between reaction and wisdom. It's the pause that says, I refuse to let this moment decide who I am. In the heat of conflict, most people rush to fill the space, to explain, to justify, to fight back. But silence is the language of mastery. It's the mark of someone who doesn't need to prove what's already true. Because silence isn't passive, it's active restraint. It's choosing not to give chaos a microphone. It's refusing to add more noise to a moment that's already too loud. And in that quiet space, clarity begins to form. When you're silent, you're not ignoring the problem, you're disarming it. You're allowing emotions to settle so truth can surface. You're reminding yourself that not every attack deserves a counterattack, and not every misunderstanding needs to be immediately corrected. Sometimes, silence speaks the loudest by saying nothing at all. It tells the other person, "You can't control my peace," and that message echoes louder than any shouted defense. The world teaches you to react, to speak up instantly, to never back down. But wisdom teaches the opposite, that timing matters more than talking. Silence gives you time to process, to see the situation from a higher perspective, to let your spirit lead instead of your ego. And when you finally do speak, your words carry weight, not heat. True self-control isn't about holding everything, and it's about releasing only what builds, heals, and aligns with peace. Silence gives you that power. It lets you conserve your energy for what truly matters instead of scattering it in every direction. Because every time you choose silence over reaction, you're not surrendering. You're stepping into mastery. You're saying, "I'm not here to win the noise, I'm here to protect my peace." And that right there is the sound of strength, quiet, steady, and unshakable. People mirror your energy. When you rise above, the argument loses air. Every interaction is an exchange of energy. Words are just the surface. What you carry internally shapes what unfolds externally. When you enter a conversation tense, defensive, or impatient, that energy multiplies. The other person feels it and reacts to it, often without realizing why. But when you bring calm, when you bring stillness, it disarms the atmosphere. You set a new tone, one that invites peace instead of conflict. Arguments thrive on matching energy. One person raises their voice, the other matches it. One person gets sarcastic, the other fires back. It's a cycle that feeds itself until no one remembers what the original issue even was. But the moment one person rises above, truly rises above, the tension starts to collapse. Because conflict can't survive without fuel, and your reaction is that fuel. When you choose not to match chaos, chaos runs out of breath. Rising above doesn't mean you think you're better than the other person. It means you've chosen to be better than the moment. You've decided that peace is more valuable than pride. When you stay grounded, you give the other person a mirror of calm, and even if they don't reflect it right away, your energy plants a seed. It shows them what composure looks like. It reminds them, even subconsciously, that peace is possible. The energy you bring into a room speaks before your mouth does. People can feel the difference between someone who's defensive and someone who's centered. When you rise above, your tone softens, your words slow down, and your presence itself becomes a stabilizer. The argument can't escalate because it can't find resistance to push against. You stop being a participant in the chaos and start being the atmosphere that transforms it. That's why emotional maturity isn't just about what you say, it's about what you carry. When your spirit is anchored in peace, you don't absorb the tension around you, you neutralize it. And that's how arguments lose air. Not by overpowering the other person, but by standing so rooted in calm that their storm has nowhere left to go. The energy you bring is the energy that will stay, so choose peace, and peace will answer back. A detached spirit doesn't fight for validation, it lives from validation. It moves from a place of fullness, not from lack. When you're truly grounded in who you are, you don't chase approval or permission to exist. You already know your worth, and that quiet confidence removes the need to be seen, understood, or praised. You no longer enter conversations to prove your value. You enter them to share truth. That's what detachment really is. Not separation from people, but separation from the need to be validated by them. Validation is like a drug to the insecure heart, momentary relief that fades as quickly as it comes. You keep needing more of it to feel stable. But the detached spirit has learned something deeper, that true stability doesn't come from how others respond to you. It comes from the peace you cultivate within yourself. When you stop needing validation, you stop performing, you stop exaggerating to be believed, stop arguing to be respected, stop explaining your every decision to be understood. You just are. That authenticity radiates strength that no argument can shake. When you live from validation, your presence becomes lighter. You're not defensive. You're not easily offended. You're not scanning faces for approval or applause. You simply speak truth with grace and let it land where it may. And ironically, That's when people listen the most, because authenticity draws more respect than persuasion ever could. When you're detached, you become unbothered by misunderstanding. You realize that someone else's inability to see your value says more about their vision than your worth. The detached spirit doesn't withdraw from love. It redefines it. It loves without needing to be loved back in the same way. It gives without keeping score. It stands in truth without requiring validation to confirm it. That kind of detachment isn't cold, it's courageous. It means your peace is self-sustained, not dependent on approval or acceptance. The beauty of living from validation instead of for it is that you carry peace everywhere you go. You stop bending yourself to fit into people's expectations and start standing fully in your purpose. And in that space, arguments lose their power because there's nothing left to prove when you already know you're enough. The moment you stop needing to be understood, peace becomes your closest friend. That's the shift from striving to surrender. When you no longer chase comprehension from others, you finally meet calm within yourself. Most of the turmoil in our conversations isn't about the topic at all. It's about wanting someone to get us. We want our intentions seen, our pain acknowledged, our point validated. But the truth is, not everyone will see you clearly and some never will, and that's okay. Peace begins the moment you stop making understanding a condition for calm. When you need to be understood, you start performing. You explain, re-explain, over-explain, hoping that if you use the right words, they'll finally see your heart. But that's where exhaustion comes from, trying to control perception. You can't carry both peace and the need to be perfectly seen. One has to go. The deeper truth is that your clarity doesn't require their comprehension. Your purpose isn't dependent on their agreement. The moment you realize that, you stop chasing validation and start standing in quiet assurance. Being misunderstood doesn't mean you're wrong. It often means you're speaking from a place they haven't yet reached. And that's not your burden to fix. You don't have to shrink your truth just because someone can't see it clearly. When you let go of that need, you create space for compassion, for patience, and most importantly, for peace. Peace isn't found in being heard. It's found in hearing yourself clearly enough that misunderstanding doesn't shake you anymore. It's knowing your own intention so deeply that misjudgment no longer feels like an attack. It's being able to say, they don't see it, but I still know who I am. That's spiritual maturity, when peace no longer depends on explanation. The moment you stop needing to be understood, your words become freer, your heart becomes lighter, and your spirit becomes unshakable. You stop forcing connection and start flowing in authenticity. You learn that truth doesn't need an audience, it just needs alignment. And in that space, peace comes close, sits beside you, and stays. Because peace doesn't need agreement to exist, it just needs you to stop arguing with what is and start resting in who you are. Peace isn't something you win at the end of an argument. It's something you choose before it begins. The strength you've been searching for doesn't live in sharper comebacks or louder defenses. It lives in restraint, in awareness, in the quiet confidence that doesn't flinch when misunderstood. The real power is not in proving, but in remaining. Remaining calm when chaos rises. Remaining kind when you're provoked. Remaining grounded when others lose balance. When you master that, when you learn to detach without disconnecting, to speak with clarity instead of control, to choose peace instead of pride, you stop reacting to life and start leading it. You stop being pulled into every battle that calls your name and start answering only to purpose. Because the truth is, no one can argue with peace. They can shout at it, misunderstand it, even reject it, but they can't move it. Peace is the final word. It's the voice that ends the noise, the stillness that wins every unseen war. So walk in that. Protect that. Be that. Let your calm become the loudest thing about you.